God and in His planned process. How many of you have ever pictured a conversation or situation in your head that you wanted to go exactly that way and it didn't turn out like that?
Of course.
Okay, come on. So, in case you guys are brand new to Christianity or you've been around it for a long time, you have definitely heard the verse Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Now, I've read that verse so many different times, but this one time that I was reading it, something stood out to me that was completely different, and it was the part that said, "and not to harm you, but plans to prosper you, to give you hope, and give you a future." I think a lot of times when we're going through different situations or we're going through moments that we have all planned out in our head and it doesn't go out that way, we think that God forgets about us and that God is just going to leave us there and harm us. But we forget about what God's intentions truly are. And God's intentions and what we know about God's intentions is that it is made out of love and of pureness and of kindness. And so for us to sit back and think that God's like that is completely not what He wants us to know about Him. And so I talked a little bit about earlier what it was like for me to go from the MBA to the mammal, but something that I know that I was supposed to do with my life was to go into the mammal 2.5 years before I graduated in my undergrad. And so I knew that that's exactly what he had, but there was never a position that I actually wanted that Southeastern already offered. And so being a part of broadcasting, I was like, God, this would be the dream. If I was a graduate assistant for the broadcasting department, what in the world, how cool would that be? And so I was talking to different professors, I was talking to the dean of my college, and he was like, yeah, that'd be a cool thing to do, but I don't know if we can actually swing that. And so that was many conversations throughout my senior year. Well, 2 weeks before I was going to graduate with my undergrad, I was told, you will find out if you will get this position right before graduation. Right before graduation comes around, I go to that professor, I go to that dean, and I was like, hey, I was told around this time that this is when I was supposed to find out about this position. And they looked at me right in the eye, and they were like, we haven't even had a conversation about it. And so I was like, okay, that freaks me out because you told me this, and I need to plan my life around it. So being from Chicago, I moved down to Lakeland, Florida, and even though I didn't have this position lined up, I still felt the Lord was telling me, Brittany, you need to come here. I'm going to lead you places that you need to go. Well, I didn't end up finding about this graduate assistant position until the last week of July. Now that's 3.5 months of just waiting and having to be complacent in the waiting. But in those moments, I felt hurt, I felt broken, I felt abandoned, and I was crying out to God every day, God, if this is where you have me, show me already. I trust you, but it's very hard for me to trust you when I'm not hearing anything. And the only thing I ever heard of this one thing was 2.5 years ago when you told me it initially. But since then, I've heard the voices of everyone around me saying that you're doing something dumb, what you're doing isn't practical, why did you move out? And so the voices of people around us can sit there and trigger different thoughts in our minds, and we have to know who truly God is. So when people say no, God always says yes. Eventually I found out about the GA position. I was very happy about that. But I always thought, I was working at Starbucks over the summer, and I was like, God, will I have to sit and work at Starbucks for the next year? Because I don't like making coffee that much. I love my customers, but I don't want to do this for the next year. And so it was in the midst of, after finding about the position, what it truly meant to trust God. And so I was brought back to this verse of Psalm 119:105, for it says, for he is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And so if you all can think about a lamp for a second, if you put it down at your feet, it gives off a little bit of light. And so if you're in a very dark room with a small little light in front of you, you could see just your feet. But it takes you completely trusting God to put that stuff there, and trusting that there's still going to be floorboards, trusting that there's still going to be a stair that you can climb, and trusting that this next season is in God's hands. So while we don't exactly know what our future holds, the good thing about God is we know who holds our future. And what we know about who holds our future is that He is good and He is faithful, and that He does not have plans to harm us, but plans to prosper us and give us hope in every day.
Amen.